I thought I was walking into my peaceful beach house for a quiet weekend, but instead found my daughter-in-law Sandra hosting what looked like a family reunion on my deck. When she spotted me through the glass door, her face twisted with disgust. "What is this old parasite doing here? We have no place for you," she shrieked, blocking my entrance while her relatives laughed. My son Tim stood silent, avoiding my eyes. I just smiled and turned around. But what I did next turned her comfortable little world into a complete nightmare. Let me start from the beginning so you understand how deeply this betrayal cut. My name is Gertrude, and at 67 years old, I thought I had built something beautiful for my family. After my husband Frank passed away 3 years ago, I discovered our construction company was worth far more than we ever imagined. $2 million sat in business accounts equipment and ongoing contracts. Frank had always been modest about our success, but his careful planning and my bookkeeping had created a small empire. Tim had been helping manage our beach house rental business while I handled the main construction company. We owned 3 properties along the California coast, with the Malibu beach house being our crown jewel. Frank and I had built it ourselves 40 years ago, back when oceanfront lots were affordable for working-class people like us. Every board, every tile, every window frame had been placed by our own hands during weekends and summer vacations. When Tim married Sandra 2 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She had been working as a cocktail waitress at a casino in Las Vegas when they met, but she quit immediately once she became pregnant with little Emma. I understood completely and supported their decision. Young mothers should focus on their babies, not worry about paying bills. I covered Sandra's medical expenses throughout her pregnancy, bought all the baby furniture, and even helped pay off her mother's credit card debt when Sandra tearfully explained her family's financial struggles. $8,000 seemed like a small price to pay for family harmony. I wanted Sandra to feel secure and loved the way Frank had always made me feel when times were tough. The beach house rental business had been my retirement plan. Frank and I agreed that Tim should handle the day-to-day operations while I finished winding down the construction company. I gave him power of attorney for the rental properties, thinking this would ease his stress after losing his father. Tim seemed overwhelmed by grief, and I wanted to help him feel useful and important. What I kept secret was my recent decision to sell the construction company entirely. The buyer offered $4.8 million for everything, including equipment contracts and our reputation. I planned to surprise Tim with his inheritance at the beach house this weekend. I had even bought a bottle of Dom Perignon and prepared a speech about how proud Frank would be of our family's future financial security. For months, I had been working 18-hour days finalizing contracts, training the new owners, and ensuring all our employees would keep their jobs. I told Tim I would be at the beach house this weekend to rest and recover before making a big family announcement. He seemed excited and supportive, suggesting I take as long as I needed to relax. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway usually filled me with joy, but that Friday afternoon something felt different. I kept thinking about Sandra's recent suggestions that I see a doctor about memory issues. She claimed I forgot conversations and repeated stories, always mentioning these concerns when Tim was present to witness her caring behavior. When I pulled into the beach house driveway and saw 4 unfamiliar cars parked on my property, my stomach dropped. Through the large picture windows, I could see at least 12 people lounging on my furniture, eating food from my kitchen, and treating my home like their personal resort. Sandra spotted me first. She marched to the sliding glass door wearing one of my expensive silk scarves, and Frank's gold watch, her face contorted with rage and disgust. Behind her stood a woman who must have been her mother, plus several younger adults who resembled Sandra's sharp features and entitled expressions. "What is this old parasite doing here?" Sandra screamed through the glass loud enough for everyone inside to hear. "We have no place for you. This weekend is for family only." Tim appeared behind her, his face flushed with embarrassment, but saying nothing to defend me. The people inside laughed and pointed, treating my humiliation like entertainment. One man raised a beer bottle in a mocking toast, while a younger woman took photos with her phone. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the cruelty of this situation. Then I smiled sweetly, waved like nothing was wrong, and walked back to my car. But instead of driving away defeated, I circled around to the neighbor's property and parked behind a row of trees where I could observe my own home without being seen. What I witnessed next changed everything. Through the windows, I watched Sandra giving what looked like a house tour, pointing out valuable artwork and antique furniture. She was clearly playing hostess, acting like the rightful owner, while my son nodded along with her performance. Then I heard her voice carry through the open deck doors during a phone conversation. "Don't worry, Mom, once we get rid of the old bat permanently, this place is ours. Tim already forged her signature on the transfer documents. We just need to be patient a little longer." My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. The child I had raised, the son I trusted with my life's work, was actively plotting to steal my home and destroy my independence. And the woman I had welcomed into our family was orchestrating the entire scheme. That moment marked the end of my naive trust and the beginning of their complete destruction. Instead of confronting them immediately, I drove to the Seahorse Inn, a small hotel about 5 miles up the coast. My mind was racing, but 40 years of running a business had taught me never to act on emotion alone. I needed information, strategy, and evidence before making any moves. From my hotel room, I called Tim and put on the performance of my life. "Hi, honey. I'm running a bit behind schedule. The contract negotiations took longer than expected. Would it be terrible if I came down tomorrow instead?" The relief in his voice was unmistakable. "Oh, that's probably better, Mom. Actually, you know what, you might want to consider selling that beach house anyway. It's really too much maintenance for someone your age. All that salt air and those steep stairs could be dangerous." "You think so?" I asked, injecting confusion into my voice. "But I love that house. Your father and I built it together." "I know, Mom, but Dad's gone now. You need to think practically about your safety and well-being. Sandra and I have been discussing it, and we really think a nice retirement community would be better for you." I felt sick hearing him speak about my future like I wasn't capable of making my own decisions, but I maintained my act. "Well, maybe you're right. I have been feeling a bit scattered lately." "Exactly," Sandra mentioned. "You've been repeating yourself and forgetting things. It's totally normal for someone your age, but we love you too much to let you struggle alone." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. The gaslighting campaign had been going on for months, and I had been too trusting to recognize it. Every time Sandra expressed concern about my memory, every suggestion about doctors and retirement homes, every comment about my age and capabilities had been calculated manipulation. I remembered the appointment Sandra had scheduled with Dr. Hoffman next week. She insisted on accompanying me for support, claiming she wanted to help the doctor understand my symptoms. Now I realized she planned to feed him a prepared list of fabricated concerns to build a medical case for my incompetence. That night, I began my investigation. Using the hotel's Wi-Fi, I accessed our business banking accounts and discovered irregularities I hadn't noticed before. Tim had been paying himself property management fees for months, while I covered all actual maintenance costs like gardening, cleaning, and repairs. According to his reports, the beach house had low occupancy rates, but when I checked vacation rental websites, I found it listed on a platform I didn't recognize, with completely different photos and descriptions. The rental income was supposed to be split 50-50 between us, but Tim claimed the house only generated about half of what I expected. Now I understood why. He was booking guests through his own platform and keeping the full payment while reporting minimal income to me. I spent hours researching Sandra's family background through social media and public records. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Sandra's aunt, Patricia Welkins, had been convicted of financial elder abuse 3 years ago for stealing over $60,000 from residents at a nursing home where she worked. Sandra's mother, Barbara Welkins, had recently been evicted from her apartment for unpaid rent and was now living with Tim and Sandra permanently. Even more disturbing, I found a local Facebook group where Sandra had been posting photos of her beach house for months. She had hosted her sister's engagement party there last month, complete with professional photographers and a catered dinner. The comments section was filled with friends congratulating her on her beautiful property and asking about rental rates. In response to one comment, Sandra wrote, "Thanks, it's been in the family for years, but we're thinking about selling soon. My senile mother-in-law will be taken care of properly, and then we can really enjoy our investment." The casual cruelty of calling me senile to strangers while planning to steal my property was breathtaking. But what shocked me most was seeing dozens of photos posted over several months showing Sandra's family and friends using my home like their personal vacation resort, while I worked exhausting hours to finalize business deals. One photo showed Sandra wearing my late mother's pearl necklace while posing in front of the fireplace Frank and I had built together. Another showed her mother sleeping in our master bedroom, surrounded by personal items I recognized from Sandra's apartment. They hadn't just been using my house occasionally. They had essentially moved in treating it like their own property while keeping me away through manufactured emergencies and urgent business meetings that required my attention in the city. The final piece of evidence came from checking my home security system remotely. Frank had installed cameras years ago for insurance purposes, but I rarely reviewed the footage. Now I watched weeks of recordings showing Tim and Sandra bringing strangers through my main house as well, apparently showing it to potential renters or buyers. In one video, Sandra tried on my jewelry and clothing, taking selfies while wearing Frank's expensive watch collection. She even brought her friends over to model my formal dresses, laughing and making cruel comments about my age and style. By sunrise, I had a clear picture of their scheme. They weren't just planning to steal my property, they had already been living their plan for months, while I remained obliviously grateful for their apparent care and concern. Now it was time to turn their own weapons against them. Monday morning found me sitting in attorney Patricia Williams' office, armed with printout screenshots and a growing sense of righteous anger. Patricia had handled Frank's estate and our business legal needs for over 20 years. Her expression grew increasingly grave as I laid out the evidence. "Gertrude, this is serious criminal behavior," she said, reviewing Tim's unauthorized property transfers. He attempted to file transfer documents last month, but they were rejected due to improper notarization. However, he's been calling my office weekly, asking about your mental state and whether guardianship proceedings might be necessary. My stomach lurched. Guardianship. He claims you're becoming forgetful and potentially dangerous to yourself. He specifically asked about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. Patricia's voice was tight with anger. I told him such concerns should be addressed with medical professionals first, but he seemed more interested in the legal timeline than your actual well-being. We spent 2 hours reviewing every document Tim had access to and every account he could potentially manipulate. The scope of his financial theft was staggering. Over 8 months, he had diverted $63,000 in rental income into personal accounts, plus used my business credit cards for over $20,000 in personal expenses. The pattern suggests escalating behavior, Patricia explained. Small thefts that grew bolder when you didn't notice. Now they're moving toward complete asset seizure through legal manipulation. From Patricia's office, I drove straight to Dr. Hoffman's practice. The receptionist, a kind woman named Jennifer, remembered Sandra's call about my upcoming appointment. "Your daughter-in-law seemed very concerned," Jennifer said. "She specifically requested cognitive testing and mentioned you've been showing signs of dementia. She even asked if family members could provide input during the evaluation." What kind of input, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She said she's been keeping a list of concerning behaviors she's witnessed. Memory lapses, confusion about dates, difficulty following conversations. She wanted to make sure Dr. Hoffman had complete information about your condition. I felt manipulated on a level I hadn't imagined possible. Sandra had been building a medical case against my mental competency while I believed she was being caring and supportive. Every conversation where she claimed I repeated myself every suggestion about seeing a doctor, every expression of concern had been calculated groundwork for legal action. At First National Bank, I met with manager Robert Chen to review every account Tim had access to. Robert had known our family for 15 years and seemed troubled by what the records revealed. "Mrs. Anderson, your son has been making unusual transfers," Robert said carefully. "Large amounts moved from your rental income account into personal accounts we didn't know he had opened. There have also been significant credit card charges for items that seem unrelated to property management." The credit card statements told their own story. Expensive dinners, designer clothing, a weekend trip to Las Vegas, furniture deliveries to Tim and Sandra's apartment. They had been funding an upgraded lifestyle entirely with my money while I lived modestly and saved for their future inheritance. "There's something else," Robert continued. "Your son inquired about your other accounts last week. He claimed you were becoming forgetful about your finances and might need help managing your money. I told him we would need documentation from you directly before providing any information." I thanked Robert for his discretion and asked him to flag all my accounts for additional security measures. No changes or access requests should be processed without my personal verified authorization. My next stop was Phoenix, Arizona. Not physically, but through a phone call to Frank's brother Harold. Harold was a retired police detective who had always been perceptive about people's true character. I trusted his judgment completely. "Gertrude, I'm glad you called," Harold said before I could even explain my situation. "Tim contacted me last month asking about options for you since you're supposedly getting confused and might hurt yourself. He wanted to know about assisted living facilities and whether I thought you were safe living alone." "What did you tell him?" "I told him he was crazy. You sounded perfectly sharp when we talked at Christmas, and I couldn't imagine you needing assisted care for years to come. But he insisted you were hiding your condition well and that family members had noticed significant decline." Harold's tone grew serious. "Gertrude, in my experience, when someone starts building a narrative about an elderly person's incompetence, they're usually planning something financial. Has Tim asked about your will lately or suggested changes to how your assets are managed?" I explained everything I had discovered, and Harold's response was immediate. "Pack some evidence and get down here for a few days. We need to plan your counterattack carefully, and you need an ally who understands how these schemes work." But before I could make travel plans, I decided to check something that had been nagging at me. Using my spare key, I visited my main house while Tim was supposedly at work. What I found there made me physically ill. Sandra and Tim had been bringing strangers through my home regularly, apparently showing it to potential renters. The security footage revealed dozens of unauthorized entries over the past 3 months. But worse than the trespassing was the personal violation. Sandra had been treating my closets like her personal shopping center. Videos showed her trying on my clothes, jewelry, and even Frank's watches. She brought friends over to model my formal dresses, laughing and making cruel comments about my age and style. In one recording, Sandra stood in my bedroom wearing my wedding dress, posing for photos while her friend recorded video. "Can you believe this old thing thought she could keep all this from us?" Sandra said, spinning in front of my antique mirror. "Once we get her declared incompetent, all of this becomes ours. Tim deserves it after putting up with her controlling behavior for so many years." The cruelty was breathtaking. But what pushed me over the edge was finding Sandra's prescription medications in my master bathroom medicine cabinet. Not just forgotten items, but current prescriptions with recent dates. They had essentially been living in my house while I worked to support their lifestyle. That evening, I called Harold back. "I'm ready to fight," I told him. "But I want to destroy them completely, not just stop them." "Good," he said, "because half measures never work with people like this. They'll just regroup and try again. When we move, it needs to be decisive and final." The war was about to begin, and I intended to win. Harold arrived from Phoenix 2 days later, officially visiting for a week to spend time with family. In reality, he came as my strategic advisor and witness. His 40 years of police experience had taught him how to build ironclad cases against manipulative criminals. "The key is making them feel confident and secure," Harold explained as we sat in my kitchen planning our approach. "Let them think their plan is working while we document everything they do." I began the most difficult acting performance of my life. When Tim called to check on me, I deliberately sounded confused about our weekend plans. "Did we discuss the beach house? I can't seem to remember if I paid the utilities this month." "Don't worry about it, Mom," Tim said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "I'll handle all that for you. You just focus on resting." "You're such a good son," I said, letting my voice quaver slightly. "Sometimes I feel like my mind isn't as sharp as it used to be." "That's completely normal," Tim replied quickly. "Sandra thinks it would be helpful if you talk to a doctor about it, just to make sure you're taking care of yourself properly." The next day, I called Sandra directly and asked her to write down her concerns about my behavior so I could share them with Dr. Hoffman. She was eager to help, creating a detailed list that would later become evidence of her fraudulent statements. "You've been forgetting conversations we just had," Sandra explained in a caring voice while I secretly recorded our phone call. "Yesterday you asked me 3 times what we were planning for Emma's first birthday, even though we discussed it at length. And last week you seemed confused about what day it was." None of these conversations had ever happened, but Sandra delivered the lies with practiced concern. She even suggested I might want to consider a safer living situation where people could keep an eye on me. "I worry about you being alone in that big house," she continued. "What if you fell down the stairs or forgot to turn off the stove? Tim and I love you too much to let something terrible happen." While I played my role as the confused elderly woman, Harold conducted his own investigation. He interviewed neighbors, reviewed public records, and even contacted his former colleagues in law enforcement. The picture that emerged was damning. Sandra's family had a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people. Her mother had been investigated twice for elder abuse, but never prosecuted due to insufficient evidence. Sandra herself had worked in 3 different nursing homes over the past 5 years, leaving each job under suspicious circumstances. "They're professionals," Harold told me grimly. "This isn't their first attempt at this kind of theft. They've probably been planning since before Sandra even married Tim." Meanwhile, Patricia Williams helped me establish an irrevocable trust that placed all my properties under professional management. The trust document included specific protections against claims of mental incompetency and required multiple independent medical evaluations before any changes could be made. I also created a new will that excluded Tim entirely, leaving everything to charities and Harold's children. But this remained our secret weapon to be revealed only if necessary. The hidden cameras I installed captured increasingly bold behavior from Tim and Sandra. They brought friends and family members to both houses, regularly treating my properties like their personal entertainment venues. Sandra's mother had essentially moved into the beach house, permanently sleeping in the master bedroom and referring to herself as the owner when neighbors asked questions. During one recorded dinner conversation at my main house, Sandra and Tim discussed their timeline openly. They planned to have me declared incompetent within 2 months, gain guardianship over my assets, and immediately sell both properties to pay for what they called proper care in a nursing facility. "She won't know the difference once she's medicated," Sandra said while serving dinner on my good china. "And we deserve this money after everything we've sacrificed for her." Tim nodded along, adding, "Dad would want us to be financially secure. Mom's just too selfish to see the big picture." Hearing my son dismiss my intelligence and autonomy while planning to steal my life's work was devastating. But it also strengthened my resolve to see them face serious consequences. The breakthrough moment came during a family dinner I hosted at my house, ostensibly to introduce Harold to Sandra's family. I played the confused grandmother perfectly, asking repeated questions and seeming overwhelmed by simple conversations. Sandra, feeling completely secure, began describing details about the beach house layout that she could only know from spending extensive time there. When I acted confused about her having visited, Tim quickly covered for her. "Sandra just has a great imagination," he said nervously. "She's probably seen the photos you showed us." But Sandra had described the specific placement of electrical outlets, the exact dimensions of the master bathroom, and the unique tile pattern Frank had installed in the kitchen. These weren't details visible in any photos. After Harold and Sandra's family left, I checked the beach house security system. Sure enough, Sandra's prescription bottles were in the bathroom, her clothes hung in the closet, and her personal items were scattered throughout the house. The next morning brought the most shocking discovery yet. Harold reviewed footage from the previous evening and noticed Sandra's sister taking photos of valuable items throughout my house, including serial numbers on electronics and maker's marks on antique furniture. "They're cataloging everything," Harold said, "building an inventory for either theft or sale. This isn't just about the real estate anymore, Gertrude. They want everything." That afternoon, I made the call that would begin their destruction. I contacted Detective Maria Rodriguez from the county's Elder Abuse Unit and scheduled an appointment to file a formal complaint. "Bring everything," Detective Rodriguez advised. "Audio recordings, video evidence, financial documents, witness statements. We'll need to build a case that proves intent and pattern of abuse." As I gathered evidence that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. Soon, Tim and Sandra's comfortable delusions would be shattered completely. They thought they were manipulating a weak, confused old woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dr. Hoffman's office felt like a battlefield when I arrived with Sandra for my appointment. She carried a thick folder of evidence documenting my supposed cognitive decline, while I carried a small recording device and 40 years of experience dealing with manipulative people. "Thank you so much for seeing my mother-in-law," Sandra began, her voice dripping with false concern. "We're really worried about her safety." Dr. Hoffman, who had been briefed by Patricia about the suspected fraud, played his role perfectly. "Tell me about your specific concerns." Sandra consulted her prepared list with theatrical precision. "She forgets conversations we just had sometimes, asking the same question multiple times in one day. Last week, she seemed confused about what day it was, and she's been having trouble managing her finances." I sat quietly, occasionally nodding or looking confused while Sandra painted a detailed picture of symptoms that had never occurred. She even claimed I had gotten lost driving to the grocery store, a complete fabrication that would have been easy to verify through security footage if it were true. Has she had any medical tests recently? Dr. Hoffman asked. No, and that's part of the problem, Sandra replied. She resists getting help and insists she's fine, but family members can see the decline clearly. When Sandra stepped out to use the restroom, Dr. Hoffman immediately switched to professional mode with me. Mrs. Anderson, I need to document these false statements officially. What your daughter-in-law just described shows deliberate intent to create a fraudulent medical narrative. Can you tell the difference between real cognitive issues and fabricated ones? I asked. Absolutely. The symptoms she described don't follow any recognizable pattern of actual cognitive decline. They're too convenient and too dramatic. Real family members report gradual changes, not sudden dramatic episodes. When Sandra returned, Dr. Hoffman continued his examination while secretly documenting her inconsistent responses to follow-up questions. When pressed for specific dates and details about my supposed incidents, Sandra couldn't provide coherent answers. Later that afternoon, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I called Tim and suggested we seriously consider his idea about selling the beach house. Really, Mom? You'd be willing to do that? His excitement was barely contained. Well, you and Sandra know more about real estate than I do. Maybe you could help me understand what it's worth. Tim practically volunteered to handle everything. Why don't we meet at the house this weekend? I could bring a real estate agent to give you a professional opinion. That sounds wonderful. You're so thoughtful to help me with these complicated decisions. What Tim didn't know was that Harold and I planned to arrive early and observe from a hidden position. We wanted to catch them in the act of presenting themselves as the property owners. Saturday morning, Harold and I parked behind the neighbor's property and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, Tim and Sandra arrived with a well-dressed woman carrying a real estate portfolio. But instead of waiting for me, they immediately began what looked like an official property showing. Through binoculars, we watched the real estate agent taking notes, while Sandra provided a detailed tour pointing out valuable features and discussing renovation possibilities. Tim handled questions about property taxes and maintenance history with the confidence of a rightful owner. The current owner is elderly and ready to move into assisted care, Sandra explained to the agent, her voice carrying clearly through the open windows. We need to liquidate assets quickly to pay for her care. What's your timeline? The agent asked. Probably within 60 days, Tim replied. Once we complete the guardianship paperwork, we'll have full authority to sell. Harold and I exchanged looks. They were actively marketing my property while discussing guardianship proceedings I knew nothing about. This went far beyond theft. They were engaging in identity fraud and real estate fraud simultaneously. The agent asked about my involvement in the sale decision. Sandra's response was chilling. Oh, she won't be making decisions much longer. We're handling everything through the proper legal channels. The family just needs to do what's best for her. After the agent left, we continued watching as Sandra and Tim celebrated with champagne on my deck. They were toasting their success while counting potential profits from my life's work. But the most damaging evidence came when Sandra called someone, apparently her mother, and put the conversation on speakerphone. The real estate woman thinks we can get at least $2.7 million for this place, Sandra announced triumphantly. Once we get rid of the old bat completely, we'll be set for life. What about the other properties? Her mother asked. Those too. Tim says the total value is over $4 million. We just need to be patient a little longer and follow the plan exactly. And she still doesn't suspect anything. Sandra laughed cruelly. She's so pathetic and trusting. Yesterday she thanked me for caring about her health. She has no idea we've been living here for months. Harold captured everything on high-definition video while I recorded the audio on my phone. We had documented evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and theft that would stand up in any court. That evening, Patricia served Tim with legal papers demanding a complete accounting of all rental income and property management activities. She also requested documentation for every decision made using his power of attorney. Tim panicked immediately, calling me in a state of barely controlled hysteria. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake. Patricia is demanding financial records and threatening legal action. Did you authorize some kind of investigation?" I played confused and concerned. "Investigation? I don't understand. Did we do something wrong?" "No, of course not. But she's asking for records going back months, and some of the documentation might be missing or incomplete." "Missing? What do you mean missing?" Tim scrambled to explain without revealing his theft. "Just some rental records that might not have been filed properly. Nothing serious, but it looks bad when lawyers get involved." "Should I call Patricia and tell her to stop?" "Yes, that would be perfect. Just explain that we've been handling everything properly and there's no need for lawyers to get involved in family business." After hanging up, I immediately called Patricia back. "Tim is panicking. He wants me to call off the investigation." "Perfect. That confirms our evidence. Innocent people don't panic when asked to provide basic financial records." The next morning brought Harold's surprise visit from Phoenix. At breakfast, he casually mentioned Tim's phone call from last month about my supposed mental decline. "Tim seemed really concerned about your memory," Harold said in front of Sandra. "He asked me about nursing homes and whether I thought you were safe living alone." Sandra and Tim exchanged quick, panicked glances before Tim attempted damage control. "I was just being cautious, Uncle Harold. You know how much we love Mom." "Absolutely," Sandra added quickly. "We just want to make sure she gets the best possible care as she ages." But Harold pressed further, acting innocently curious about their specific concerns. The more he questioned them, the deeper they dug themselves into contradictory explanations. "It's interesting," Harold mused. "When I talked to Gertrude at Christmas, she seemed sharper than people half her age. What specific incidents made you worried?" Neither Tim nor Sandra could provide consistent answers. Their stories kept changing, and they couldn't agree on dates or details of my supposed confusion. That evening, after Harold and Sandra's family left, I made the discovery that sealed their fate. While reviewing security footage from the past week, I found Sandra on the phone discussing their accelerated timeline. "We need to create an incident that proves the old woman is unsafe living alone," Sandra told someone while pacing in my kitchen. "Something dramatic enough to justify emergency guardianship proceedings." "What kind of incident?" the person asked. "Maybe she forgets something dangerous like leaving the stove on or falls down the stairs. Nothing that would really hurt her, but enough to show she needs immediate supervision." My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning theft anymore. They were considering staging accidents or dangerous situations to build their case against my competency. The next morning, I found evidence that they had already begun. My gas stove had been tampered with. Pilot light connections were deliberately loosened, creating a potentially dangerous gas leak. If I hadn't been staying at the hotel, I could have been seriously hurt or killed. This was no longer about money. It was about my safety and potentially my life. It was time to destroy them completely. The gas leak discovery transformed everything from a family dispute into a potential attempted murder case. I immediately called the gas company, who confirmed the connections had been deliberately loosened. The technician took photographs and filed a safety incident report that would become crucial evidence. Ma'am, this wasn't accidental," the technician explained grimly. "Someone with basic mechanical knowledge intentionally created a dangerous situation. You could have died from gas poisoning or explosion." Detective Rodriguez from the Elder Abuse Unit upgraded my case to include assault and reckless endangerment charges. "This shows escalating behavior," she explained. They've moved from financial fraud to potentially deadly action. Patricia's financial audit revealed the full scope of Tim's theft. Beyond the $63,000 in diverted rental income, we discovered unauthorized property management fees, fraudulent maintenance charges, and direct transfers totaling over $90,000. "He's been systematically looting your accounts for 8 months, Patricia reported. "The pattern shows increasing boldness. Small amounts at first, then larger thefts when you didn't notice. Bank records revealed suspicious timing that coincided with my out-of-town business trips. Every time I traveled to finalize company sales or meet with contractors, significant transfers occurred from my accounts. Tim had been monitoring my schedule and timing his thefts for maximum opportunity." Dr. Hoffman provided written documentation that Sandra's described symptoms were medically inconsistent and appeared deliberately fabricated. His report noted that I demonstrated perfect cognitive function during examination and that the false medical narrative constituted attempted elder abuse. "The symptoms she described don't occur in isolation," Dr. Hoffman explained. "Real cognitive decline follows recognizable patterns. Her list reads like someone researched dementia symptoms online and created a fictional case study." Harold's investigation uncovered the broader family conspiracy. Sandra's mother had been investigated for elder abuse in 2 previous states, but moved before charges could be filed. Sandra herself had worked at multiple care facilities under different names, leaving each job when financial irregularities were discovered. "This is their profession," Harold reported. "They target elderly people with assets, gain their trust, then systematically steal everything while building cases for incompetency." The hidden cameras provided devastating evidence of their true intentions. Hours of footage showed Sandra and Tim discussing their timeline for gaining control of my assets, selling my properties, and committing me to a care facility against my will. One particularly damning recording captured Sandra coaching her mother on what to say if questioned by authorities. "Remember, you've been living with us, not at the beach house. And if anyone asks, Gertrude has been confused and forgetful for months." Frank's sister Margaret provided additional witness testimony. When Harold interviewed her, she revealed Tim had contacted her seeking information about nursing homes, claiming I was becoming dangerous to myself and others. "He wanted recommendations for facilities with memory care units," Margaret told Harold. "He said Gertrude had been having episodes where she forgot to turn off appliances or got lost while driving." Margaret's testimony was crucial because she lived in another state and had no financial interest in my situation. Her account proved Tim had been spreading false narratives about my mental state to multiple family members. The technology evidence continued mounting. Security footage captured Sandra and Tim returning to both properties during times they claimed to be elsewhere. Video showed them cataloging valuable items, taking photographs for potential sales, and Sandra wearing my jewelry while video calling friends to brag about her inheritance. Detective Rodriguez assembled a task force including financial crimes investigators and the district attorney's office. "This case involves multiple felonies across several months," she explained. "We're looking at elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, and now attempted assault." The most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Tim's personal computer. They found detailed floor plans of both my house's inventory lists of valuable items and research into nursing facilities and guardianship laws. "He had been planning this systematically for over a year," Detective Rodriguez reported. "There are files dating back to before his wedding suggesting this marriage might have been part of the scheme from the beginning." Email records revealed correspondence between Sandra and her family members discussing the old woman's assets and strategies for gaining legal control. One email from Sandra's mother included the phrase, "Once she's declared incompetent, we can liquidate everything and disappear." But the most damaging evidence was Tim's attempt to file guardianship paperwork without my knowledge. Court records showed he had submitted preliminary documents claiming I was mentally incompetent and posed a danger to myself and others. The guardianship petition included false medical statements, fabricated incident reports, and forged documentation of my supposed cognitive decline. Tim had scheduled a hearing for the following week, planning to have me declared incompetent before I even knew legal proceedings had begun. This is one of the most calculated elder abuse cases I've seen, Detective Rodriguez told me. They weren't just stealing money, they were systematically destroying your legal rights and personal autonomy. Patricia discovered that Sandra's family had prepared witness statements ready to testify about my supposed mental decline. Sandra's mother and sister were prepared to lie under oath about incidents that never occurred. They had a complete legal strategy, Patricia explained. Once guardianship was established, they could sell your properties, liquidate your assets, and control every aspect of your life. The final piece of evidence came from reviewing my phone records. Tim had been monitoring my calls and texts through a family phone plan, tracking my conversations with attorneys, doctors, and family members. They knew about every step of my investigation before I could act. They were always one step ahead because they were literally spying on your communications, Harold pointed out. That's why they seemed so confident in their plan. As we compiled evidence for prosecution, the scope of their betrayal became overwhelming. This wasn't just theft or fraud. It was a comprehensive plan to steal my identity, destroy my independence, and control my remaining years through legal manipulation. Tim and Sandra had spent months methodically dismantling my life while I trusted them completely. But their careful planning was about to become the foundation of their complete destruction. Justice was finally within reach. The guardianship hearing that Tim had secretly scheduled became the stage for their public humiliation and legal destruction. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, they arrived at the courthouse expecting a routine procedure to declare me mentally incompetent. Instead, they found themselves facing a coordinated legal and criminal justice response that would destroy their lives completely. Tim and Sandra entered the courtroom with Sandra's mother and sister as planned witnesses, plus a geriatric specialist named Dr. Marcus Webb, who had never actually examined me but was prepared to testify about my supposed cognitive decline based on Sandra's fabricated reports. Their confidence evaporated when they saw me sitting at the plaintiff's table with Patricia Harold, Dr. Hoffman, Detective Rodriguez, and 2 additional prosecutors from the district attorney's office. Judge Elizabeth Harper called the hearing to order, and Patricia immediately requested permission to present evidence of fraud and elder abuse related to the guardianship petition. Your Honor, the respondent in this case has been the victim of systematic financial exploitation and legal manipulation by the very people seeking guardianship, Patricia announced. We have extensive documentation proving the petitioner has fabricated medical evidence and committed multiple felonies. Tim's attorney, a young public defender named James Mitchell, who had clearly not been informed about the case details, looked stunned as Patricia began presenting evidence. The audio recordings played first. Sandra's voice filled the courtroom as she described fabricated symptoms to Dr. Hoffman, coached her mother on false testimony, and discussed their timeline for getting rid of the old bat permanently. Judge Harper's expression grew darker with each revelation. When the recording of Sandra discussing the need to create an incident that would prove I was unsafe living alone played for the courtroom, several people gasped audibly. Dr. Hoffman testified next, explaining how Sandra's described symptoms were medically inconsistent and appeared deliberately fabricated. The behavioral patterns described don't match any recognized form of cognitive decline, he stated professionally. They read like someone researched dementia symptoms online and created fictional case studies. Detective Rodriguez presented the financial evidence methodically. Bank records, forged documents, unauthorized transfers, and fraudulent property management fees painted a picture of systematic theft totaling over $90,000. The defendants used the victim's trust and their positions of authority to systematically loot her accounts while building a false narrative about her mental competency, Detective Rodriguez testified. But the most devastating evidence was the security footage. The courtroom watched in shocked silence as videos showed Tim and Sandra treating my properties like their personal vacation resorts, hosting parties, conducting unauthorized real estate showings, and discussing the sale of my assets while planning my institutionalization. One particularly damning video showed Sandra wearing my jewelry while video calling friends to brag about her upcoming inheritance, referring to me as the old parasite who's finally going to get what she deserves. Harold presented evidence of the broader family conspiracy, including Sandra's family history of elder abuse and their pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people across multiple states. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, Harold testified. This was a calculated professional operation targeting Mrs. Anderson's assets from the moment Sandra entered the family. The gas stove tampering evidence brought audible murmurs of shock from the courtroom gallery. The gas company technician testified that the dangerous leak had been created deliberately and could have resulted in death from poisoning or explosion. Judge Harper interrupted the proceedings to address Tim and Sandra directly. Are you aware that this hearing was supposed to determine your mother's mental competency? Instead, we've heard hours of evidence about your criminal conspiracy to defraud her. Tim's attorney requested a recess to consult with his clients, but Judge Harper denied the request. This hearing will continue until we've heard all evidence relevant to the guardianship petition. Dr. Webb, the geriatric specialist Sandra's family had paid to provide false testimony, requested permission to withdraw from the proceedings after hearing the audio evidence of Sandra fabricating symptoms. I was provided with false information about the alleged patient's condition, Dr. Webb testified reluctantly. The symptoms described to me appear to have been deliberately fabricated. As the evidence mounted, Sandra began crying and claiming she had been manipulated by Tim into participating in the scheme. Tim remained silent, but grew increasingly pale as the full scope of their prosecution became clear. Judge Harper dismissed the guardianship petition entirely and ordered immediate criminal charges. The evidence presented today shows deliberate fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. This court finds no basis whatsoever for questioning Mrs. Anderson's mental competency. Detective Rodriguez arrested Tim and Sandra in the courtroom on charges including elder abuse fraud, conspiracy identity theft, attempted theft, and reckless endangerment. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 15 years in prison plus mandatory restitution. Sandra's mother and sister were also arrested on conspiracy charges for their planned false testimony and participation in the financial scheme. Within hours, the story became local news. Video of Tim and Sandra being led away in handcuffs appeared on television and social media, destroying any remaining reputation they might have claimed. The financial reckoning began immediately. Bank investigators froze all accounts Tim had accessed and traced every fraudulent transaction. His personal assets, including his car furniture and savings accounts, were seized to begin restitution payments. Sandra's family faced additional consequences beyond criminal charges. Her mother was evicted from the beach house with sheriff supervision and investigated for welfare fraud after investigators discovered she had been claiming homelessness while living in my property. Sandra's sister lost her job when her employer learned about her participation in the criminal conspiracy. Their family's name became associated with elder abuse throughout their community. Tim's former friends and colleagues learned about his betrayal through court records and news coverage. The construction industry, where reputation means everything, completely shunned him. Several former business associates called to express their shock and disgust. The personal aftermath was swift and brutal. Tim received 3 years in prison plus 5 years probation with mandatory restitution requirements. Sandra got 2 years in prison plus community service and psychological evaluation. Their baby Emma was placed with Sandra's aunt in another state while Sandra served her sentence. Tim's parental rights were suspended pending completion of his incarceration and psychological evaluation. The civil consequences multiplied their punishment. I filed lawsuits for damages beyond the stolen money, including emotional distress property damage and punitive damages for their attempted destruction of my independence. Their personal relationships collapsed completely. Sandra's friends abandoned her after learning about the scheme through social media. Tim's former co-workers refused to associate with him, and several business contacts publicly denounced his actions. But my victory extended beyond their punishment. The sale of my construction company proceeded as planned, providing me with the financial security Frank and I had worked toward our entire lives. I used part of the proceeds to establish the Frank Anderson Foundation for Elder Protection, providing legal assistance to seniors facing financial abuse and manipulation. The foundation's first case was helping an 80-year-old woman whose nephew had been stealing her Social Security checks. 6 months after their conviction, I was finally able to enjoy my beach house in peace. Harold visited regularly, and we spent hours on the deck watching the sunset while discussing our plans for the foundation. The house felt different now, cleansed of the negative energy Tim and Sandra had brought into it. I renovated completely, installing state-of-the-art security systems and updating everything to reflect my own tastes, rather than accommodating people who had never respected my choices. Sandra occasionally sent letters from prison asking for forgiveness and requesting money for commissary funds. These letters went directly into my shredder along with similar requests from her mother and sister. Tim wrote only once a brief note claiming he had been manipulated by Sandra and asking if we could repair our relationship after his release. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are simply unforgivable. The life lesson from this experience was profound and clear. Misplaced trust and excessive generosity had enabled their abuse, but recognizing the manipulation and fighting back had restored my independence and self-respect. I learned that real family members protect and support each other honestly, while predators exploit kindness and use love as a weapon for manipulation. My new boundaries included regular financial audits, limited access to my accounts, and healthy skepticism toward anyone suggesting I was incapable of managing my own affairs. Most importantly, I discovered that age and gender didn't make me vulnerable. Trusting the wrong people had made me vulnerable. By fighting back intelligently and systematically, I had not only protected myself, but potentially saved other elderly people from similar schemes. Today I wake up every morning in my beautiful beach house surrounded by the life Frank and I built together. I have genuine friends who respect my independence, family members like Harold, who support my decisions, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served completely. Sandra's cruel words about me being an old parasite had revealed their true character while motivating my complete victory. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies give you is showing you exactly who they really are. The Frank Anderson Foundation continues growing, helping dozens of seniors protect themselves from financial exploitation. Every case we win honors Frank's memory while proving that elderly people can fight back successfully when they have proper support and legal resources. My story became a cautionary tale about elder abuse, but more importantly, it became a testament to the power of intelligent resistance against manipulation and fraud. As I reflect on this experience from my deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean, I feel grateful for the strength to fight back and the resources to win completely. Tim and Sandra learned too late that underestimating a determined 70-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of their lives. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced manipulation from family members or people you trusted? What warning signs do you think elderly people should watch for to protect themselves from financial abuse? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you. Please subscribe to hear more stories about justice, resilience, and the power of fighting back against people who try to take advantage of others. Share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding how manipulation tactics work and how to protect against them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that age is just a number. Wisdom and determination can overcome any challenge when you refuse to be a victim.